Hello, and welcome to another episode of Off Label with Altasciences, where we peel back the label on the drug development industry. I'm your host, Lisa Sanford, and on this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Smith, Senior Vice President of Translational Science at Certara, where he leads a global team of drug development scientists and regulatory strategists to create value for pharma and biopharma sponsors across the entire life cycle and ultimately accelerate patient access to medicines. And we've just had an incredible conversation about the work Certara is doing, all things model-informed drug development, as well as exciting and innovative changes in the drug development industry, including the potential to speed up studies, reduce the number of subjects in both non-clinical and clinical trials, and much more. So let's dive into our conversation. Patrick, so great to have you today. I'm so excited to talk to you. We'd love to start by having the audience get to know you a bit better. So what led you to where you are today?
Great. Well, it's been a longer journey than I care to admit sometimes. But my background, I'm a clinical pharmacologist by training. Career has spanned academia. So I was faculty University of Buffalo for almost a decade, and then spent time within R&D in clinical pharmacology, translational science, and various roles within large pharma, primarily with Roche. And then decided it was time to do something a little bit different, always wanting to scratch that entrepreneurial itch before the career was over. And really, some colleagues and I saw an opportunity that all of this model-informed drug development and modeling was becoming very much mainstream, but it was something that only the large pharma companies could do, right? They had departments that did modeling and practice model-informed drug development. And at the time, there was this big explosion of biotechs. And I think it was about that time we crossed the threshold of more drugs being discovered in small biotech companies than in large pharma. So there was really no opportunity or no way that smaller biotech companies could get the modeling work. They didn't have people internally that could do it. So we formed a consulting company to really bring model-informed drug development to biotechs. And that was when I got into the consulting world in 2013, roughly. We were later acquired by Certara a few years later in 2016. And I've been at Certara ever since, really with the same mission of trying to grow model-informed drug development and make development more effective, more efficient through applying and further developing these tools. So I've had a number of roles at Certara. Until about a year ago, was president of the services division and decided to take a step back to get closer to clients and closer to projects again, which was where my passion really lies. So I've been doing that in more of a strategy and individual contributor kind of advisory role for the last year.
Well, couldn't agree more that that's the best place to be, right, with our clients. So if I'm hearing this correct, you experienced this yourself in large pharma and you saw the advantages. And so maybe it was important to you that this kind of reached the masses. What is your why here, Patrick?
So really, it's every career change, every decision that I've made has really been focused on just one question, which is how can I help deliver more impact, greater impact? We are, I think, very fortunate to work in this industry and be able to, do something that, may sound cliche, but really helps humanity, right? And I figure if I'm going to work so hard, let's do something that's going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
And so I'm fully committed that, what we all do together has changed so many lives and made such a difference in patients. And it's the, most rewarding thing that I think one could do with a career.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's our way to play a small role, right, towards the greater good, for sure. So with this really impressive and varied career that you've had, what's been your favorite part so far?
Oh, that's, there have been so many. I reflect back to the unbelievably talented and motivated people that I've had a chance to work with over the years in all settings. And I've had some great mentors and great role models. And all of my favorite moments come down to achieving great things with other people that you enjoy working with. And I've had the good fortune to work on some awesome teams and to be able to do that.
That's great. So, Patrick, I'm so excited to talk to you today. We've obviously known each other for a long time. And what's funny is I'm sitting here thinking to myself, when did I actually meet you? I'm not sure I actually can recall that moment in time because I just feel like you're one of those individuals like, of course I know Patrick. I've always known Patrick. So I'm really happy that you're our guest today. It's really exciting to be part of this. But do you remember when we actually first met? Because I'm not sure exactly when that was. Probably like 10 years ago, like easily, if we're going to date ourselves. We've obviously had a formal working relationship and being able to tap into Certara's power. But I'm just going to be honest, Patrick, I'm always happy that I have my personal connection to you. I've always been able to just call you on the side or have you join a client meeting, real quick. So friendship comes with perks for sure. So obviously, you're very passionate about accelerating drug development. You're representing one of the most cutting edge thoughts, in the industry right now on how to use these modeling and simulation to really inform drug development, optimize, make the best possible studies that we can. So ultimately, we're trying to accelerate patient access to medicine fast as possible. So what's driving that passion within you?
I think it really goes back to my early career. So I started out thinking I was going to be a practicing pharmacist, right? So I went to
Okay.
went to pharmacy school and have a lot of experience early on in the healthcare sector, right? Taking care of patients, both, at your pharmacy around the corner as well as working in hospitals. And always felt like running around the hospital chasing down, we would practice something that's called therapeutic drug monitoring, right? And we would monitor drug levels of things like vancomycin or other antibiotics that a patient was on and make dose adjustments, right? And so that was really the first flavor of being able to optimize treatment and hopefully see an impact on patient outcomes.
So, like real world evidence here being collected and being applied forward. So, yep.
Absolutely. So you're writing notes in the chart and you're taking care of, Mrs. Jones and adjusting her doses, all the while thinking we were likely doing great things. I think looking back, it was very, very basic, very unsophisticated. And so it's always been, though, with that patient care focus on everything we do in drug development, that ultimately being able to make a difference for an individual patient. I think that, as we have progressed in the pharmaceutical industry, all of the things that we do from a drug development modeling and simulation perspective is possible because pharma has invested billions and billions to create the infrastructure so all that data can be made available electronically. One of the things that's exciting to me is where we're starting to go is being able to circle back to the patient with the digitization of the world. All of this data that used to be only available in the drug development space is now available, right, with patients, with real world data. And so, I see this eventually circling around to be able to be not just a drug development tool, but also a patient care tool.
Wow. So back then, when you were recording this, did you ever think you'd be sitting here today using, the advantage of the software and the intelligence that we have available to us today?
I think we all had a dream,
Yeah.
right, of what this could look like, of where this could go, but no one could really imagine how far it's gotten. And, I think we're very fortunate with the development of the science, the enhancement of biology, of computer science, and so the cost of computing coming down, right? The greater availability of all of that with the advent of more recently AI machine learning. No one could have predicted that, general vision of where things could go. Yeah. And I still think we're in the early stages, right? Of, if I think where we've been, where we are, versus where we'll be in another 5, 10 years. I don't know exactly what drug development will look like then, but I know it's more in silico than it is today, and that we're using fewer animals
Absolutely.
and that we're using fewer humans in clinical trials. That's for sure.
Obviously optimizing what we do with them and
Absolutely.
really pinpointing. Okay, well, that's a perfect segue that you mentioned the advancements in the industry, how we're heading towards AI. So, are there any projects that you're working on that just haven't come to fruition yet? But they're going to be game changers in the industry when they do. So give us a little view into where you see all this is heading, because we already have some really positive evidence that it's heading in a very helpful direction.
Yeah. So a couple of themes. So one is our field has solved a lot of problems by applying modeling to the development process. But those problems have generally been a little bit more solving individual questions, right? So if there's let's say a drug-drug interaction, will there be a drug interaction between this new medicine and this drug that these patients may be on? That's one question we can answer. Or if you change formulations, what's the likelihood that this new formulation will be equivalent to the old one? And so we've gotten really good at answering these individual questions and expanding individual use cases. But actually, the sort of next evolution is being able to put these things all together into one holistic platform or format, right? Because if you look at model-informed drug development, there's an alphabet soup of, QSP, systems pharmacology, and then there's another toolbox called physiological-based pharmacokinetics or PBPK, and then there's, PKPD, and there's, just on and on, all these different techniques and different approaches. Now people are starting to connect these models together so they actually talk to each other, right? And being able to put that into a single platform so that these models build on each other. We talk about a family of models through a drug development program where the output of one model becomes the input to the next one, just as you're looking at answering different questions. Because the types of tools we use, the types of models that we utilize, again, are very dependent on the questions. When you're early in development, even in discovery, you really are looking at more of a mechanistic basis. So I liken those models to kind of being like a microscope,
Yeah.
right? You're
Yeah.
looking very detailed at very limited information.
Sure.
And then as you go through the development process, you have to zoom out because then you're starting to look at populations of patients. You're not treating just one individual. It's how does the population respond? And if you treat, 10,000 people, what is the clinical outcome, right? What is the economic outcome? And so as you zoom out, you go from that microscope to more of a telescope,
Exactly.
right? And so the lens and the types of things that one is trying to answer evolves. So putting all of those things together of being able to go, again, from discovery all the way to predicting, clinical outcomes is one of the next big places for this industry to go.
It's exciting. It's exciting. So when we're looking to determine, drug-drug interaction, predict what we think it might be or look at how we think a formulation might act, obviously we're tapping into existing data, right? What we know from previous trials, but then also the models are becoming smarter with the data that we're inputting as we're ongoing in the actual study or program itself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So we have created these mechanistic frameworks that really incorporate things like the physiology of animals and humans that describe in incredible detail, right? Flows of, of fluids of blood through different organs, rates of metabolism, very detailed in the amount of drug metabolizing enzymes, where they are in the gut, the liver, tremendous amount of sophistication that has been created through literally 30 years of data generated both in the lab and in the clinic to populate these models. And then all we basically need to do is do some measurements of, how is this drug metabolized by this particular metabolizing enzyme to know, does it inhibit or induce that enzyme in any way? We can then predict, will there be a drug interaction with a large degree of certainty, to the point where, we used to run lots and lots of drug interaction trials. We still need to do some of them, but we literally have hundreds of examples where we've been able to waive clinical trials based on simulations from these models that in the past would have required a study. So it's pretty exciting, it's pretty cool, and it's based
So it's making us
again
smarter,
over,
right? It's making us
yeah.
smarter, making us more efficient. Obviously, making us smarter and more adept at optimizing what we're doing, not necessarily replacing, not necessarily instead of, but when we can use this data to really fortify our confidence that, something can be optimized or eliminated, how is that being received by the regulators? Because obviously this is our ultimate client, right? So how are they responding to using model-informed drug development to fortify the packages that you're submitting?
FDA, EMA are some of the biggest drivers of the adoption of model-informed drug development. It's proven its place as really a standard of practice. And so it's become an expectation of regulators that people include modeling as part of their program. Modeling occurs in something like 30 plus regulatory guidance documents. So it's really hats off to FDA, because they've really, in many
Adopted.
ways, led the
Yeah,
charge to drive greater adoption of these tools. And you know what it's like, if the FDA says you have to do this, everyone's going to do it.
probably should do that. Yes.
And until they tell you you have to do it, then the adoption's not necessarily going to be so great, right? Because nobody ever got fired for doing things the same way all
That's
the
right.
time.
That's right.
And so, being a highly regulated industry, change is not always something that, we in drug development have been fast to embrace.
This has been really exciting, Patrick, to learn more about sort of the origin of using modeling and simulation and how to actively apply that to be more optimized and efficient in drug development. So it's a great segue. Certara is obviously a top organization you can tap into to really have this assistance directly. So, bottom line here, what really makes Certara's offering different, Patrick?
So we are the market leader in terms of creation of, the tools and the methods for doing modeling. But we like to think of ourselves as the number one practitioners of actually applying this to drug development, because all of these things don't mean anything if they don't add value and add
True.
impact.
True.
And throughout my career, and one of the motivations to start a consulting organization was seeing the silos within large pharma and seeing some of really what I would call sophisticated models built that unfortunately were not integrated well into the strategy and the development program. So they ended up having no impact, right? They didn't allow decisions to be made and became more of an academic exercise than anything else. And so we are really about developing the next generation of in silico drug development and continuing to develop the software, the techniques, and hopefully demonstrate through example of how one can apply these to make a real difference in the development process.
Right, right. So what pain points are you really addressing by having this available?
Well, if you look at the productivity of drug development, there have been numerous publications on this, and how productive and effective a development organization comes down to is really based on a number of factors. It includes the cycle time, right? So how long does it take to move a compound through the development process? How much does it cost? How many shots on goal do you have? And what's the probability of success of each of those programs? So it's really four main factors. And we focus really on improving three of the four. So time is one that obviously we can save.
Clear message that resonates. Yes.
Yeah, we have lots of examples of being able to design better trials to go faster, make them shorter, make them smaller, avoid them. When we can, let's not do any trials at all. Obviously, that has an impact on cost, right? If we're doing smaller, shorter, but more informative trials.
Which is always important.
And then the important one is increasing probability of success, right? If we are able to design a study that's more likely to be positive, or we're able to ensure the dose is the right dose. All of these drugs, many of these drugs, if may be the best thing since sliced bread, but if it's not the right dose, it's not going to deliver from either a safety or an efficacy perspective.
Exactly. Well, these seem like very clear value messages to me. So tell me a little bit about how it's received actually in the marketplace. Like, what do clients think? What do CROs think? Is there skepticism that you have to get over? Is this something that most clients have heard of, actively wanting to apply as well? Tell me a little bit about the evolution there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I often reminisce with some of my more mature colleagues that back in the day, we used to spend a lot of time just telling people about model-informed drug development, what it is, and why they should adopt it. And there was always a lot of skepticism. There were a lot of challenges, and it's very interesting that we don't have those conversations anymore.
Okay.
I can't remember, I speak to a lot of clients, and maybe one or two conversations a year is around, is this a good idea or not? A large number of our clients come as well because they've gotten feedback from the FDA, and the FDA had told them, hey guys, you need to do some modeling here.
Okay, so they're actually suggesting this. They're saying you need to apply this to
100%.
your drug development program. Okay.
We like to say sometimes the FDA is our best business development partner, right? Because that's where
Yes, for
we get a
sure.
lot of leads. But it's been around so long. I think it's really ubiquitous and common practice. I guess the things that change or the use cases are continuing to evolve.
Of course.
Right. And so, we got a lot of interest to people coming and asking, well, could we do this? Could we get out of this trial? And sometimes, right, sometimes some of the asks are a little bit crazy, and we may have to say, yeah, no, we still have to do the study, right? Or,
Right. Right, of
we're
course.
not, you don't quite have enough data, right, to build a model that's going to be convincing. And so, go collect some more data. That's another thing that we see is, unfortunately failed studies
Sure.
where clients may reach out and the trials didn't deliver, and then it becomes a little bit of a rescue mission to figure out what went wrong. And if the right data wasn't collected along the way, there's really not a lot that we can do to help. So if you are practicing model-informed drug development, it's not only about the modeling, right? It's the way that you do development is different because you're collecting data along the way because you want to inform a model that you're going to use later. And therefore, what you do, the questions you ask, the approach is a little bit different than the standard traditional way of developing compounds.
So it sounds like just through the due diligence of being with the company so long, Certara offering this to clients, the barrier of adoption seems to almost be gone now, which is great. So it sounds like these messages just resonate and that it's actually more the norm that this is, in fact, part of the strategy. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I fully agree. It's very common these days.
All right, well, let's pivot to the Certara Altasciences partnership. Super excited about this, of course. Feel like we're very duly matched organizations, to be honest. Since May, Altasciences and Certara have been in formal strategic partnership. We're combining the Altasciences acceleration platform with Certara's biosimulation expertise, which will allow sponsors to move faster and make more confident development decisions. Less than half of the drug candidates make it from preclinical testing into first-in-human studies, and common roadblocks can include toxicity, poor pharmacokinetics, lack of efficacy, and challenges translating results from animals to humans. But the good news is many of these challenges can be identified and addressed earlier with a more integrated, model-informed approach to drug development. And that's why we're so excited about this partnership and what it can offer. So let's talk about ensuring ongoing safety, right? When we're reducing, the number of patients, let's say, or the number of animals that we're going to use because we're relying upon what the model is telling us, what past data has suggested, what other mechanisms of actions of molecules look like. So how are the clients sort of reacting to this? Like, are they agreeing, okay, I don't have to look at 3 dose levels. I can only look at 2. I can only have a smaller number of patients to power my study and it'll be okay. How is the reaction? Is it, yeah, that sounds fantastic. Let's go for it. Or is there a little more like, well, we kind of want to follow the tried and true traditional route? What are you seeing?
Well, one of the things why we're so excited to partner with Altasciences, and we've worked with Altasciences on a number of programs and quite a lot over the years.
Yes,
So it's a known entity.
directly and indirectly.
But you know that at Certara we don't run any trials. So we don't do operations, we don't have sites, we don't even have labs, right? So we are completely focused on the strategy and information side of the coin. And so one of the Achilles heels of applying a lot of the modeling and simulation over the years has been the time it takes to, for example, get data back and get it into a format that actually can be used in real time to support decision making. And given all of the operational expertise at Altasciences and our ability to be able to integrate our systems and automate data flows so we don't have to go from, to a third party and back and, all these complicated things that sometimes it takes more to get the data to the analyst, more time to get the data to the analyst than it does to actually do the analysis itself. So we're excited to be able to solve those fundamental problems and therefore integrate more real-time use of these tools in trials to be able to make decisions. And I would argue that doing it that way is actually safer for patients because we're able to look at data more in real time, getting away from things like trailing pharmacokinetics. And, in phase 1, we're always a cohort behind looking at data.
Yes, at the data, sure.
So if we can improve that, and rather than looking at, descriptive data, being able to actually bring some modeling in to simulate the next cohort before it happens. Again, I argue that's the safest way to develop a drug.
I agree.
And by applying these tools, you're not, we don't want to take any more risk in phase 1, right?
Exactly.
We're not about that. And these tools are also, they're tools, they inform, but it still requires good clinical judgment.
Absolutely.
And, we're not deviating.
And a high quality conducted study, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's also, some experience and expertise in knowing, as you're looking at data, how much weight you put on all of the information that you have at hand. And the modeling results is one piece of that. But it's kind of like, since having moved down to Florida, I've become very interested in hurricane modeling, right? And hurricane forecasting.
Ah, okay. Very similar.
So if you
Is
ever
it likely to hit you?
Yeah, you ever look at, there's 50 different models for predicting hurricanes, and they'll come, and one model will predict it goes, it goes out to Central America. Another one predicts it goes into Georgia, and it's all over the place. And so you have to have some level of confidence with that model of, how heavy do you weigh that in your decision making? So if the data is good, and we can be confident in the model, then we'll weigh it highly, right?
Okay. You'll be the guy out there in the bad weather saying,
Yeah,
I'm fine, I'm fine.
exactly. So you'll have confidence where that hurricane's going to land.
That's right. That's right. Whether you can stay or evacuate.
Yeah. So it all comes down to decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that's a perfect segue, actually. So, at Altasciences, we see the same exact sort of needs here. Everyone's concerned with time, investment, and obviously it's no issue to mobilize up front when you sort of have a plan, even if it's informed by a model of how you're going to approach. But, really important is being able to pivot on emerging data. That's often exactly how these programs go along in reality. And modeling is used throughout the whole process. And, our acceleration model at Altasciences is obviously very adept at being able to accept whatever that emerging real-time data looks like and being able to pivot accordingly and have all of the connected pieces pivot along with it. So what to you is really meaningful acceleration? What does that actually mean, Patrick?
So, there's acceleration in thoughtful ways, and then there's acceleration that's going to lead to, poor outcomes. So going crazy fast.
Exactly. So it's not just about the sake of speed is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
It's not just about let's go as fast as we can.
exactly.
Okay.
Right. Because at the end of the day, the most important metric is the probability of success, right? And generating the data that's going to support the program moving forward. And that's always at the top of mind. But, working together, we can cut a lot of that time out. If we can optimize the design of a phase 1 study, things that we do on a daily basis, like, getting the first dose right? What is your starting dose? You don't necessarily need to start at very low doses, or if there's a lot of uncertainty. We have a lot of experience with using these techniques to justify a higher starting dose. So you can skip cohorts or get right to cohorts that are going to be more informative and more useful. So all of that is part of the optimization process that ultimately leads to more efficiency, but has the side effect, if you will, of also cutting time out.
Right. How do we know that we can actually trust that data? Like, how do we know that, okay, we don't need to do this low dose level. We're going to start here on the first in human. So what kind of determines that, draws the line? I mean, obviously any client has the right to decide, I prefer to look at all of it, even if the model suggests otherwise. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the decision tree that happens when you are deploying modeling, because it may not be 100% like, yes, let's go for it. There could be some subject matter expert opinion, I think, that goes into the reality of what we end up doing.
Absolutely. And every program is bespoke and individual.
Yes. That's the name of our whole business, bespoke. Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why I love early development, right? Everything is unique. And so it really depends on the situation. It really depends on risk benefit, right? So what is the potential risk if you're wrong? And all of that needs to be incorporated, right? If this is a compound, where that mechanism has already been in humans, right? We know about it.
Well understood, well
Yeah.
characterized, that type of stuff.
If it's inert, if it's not active in people without disease, and we're in healthy volunteers, right? All of those things play a role in how aggressive one wants to be. But I can say that the traditional approach of setting your starting dose at 1/10 of the NOAL isn't always the most thoughtful and efficient way of doing it. So we always like to consider multiple approaches and look at the totality of data. But no one's going to do anything that we're not completely comfortable with from a clinical perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So is there ever an instance where it turns out we do need to do something, even if perhaps we thought we did not, or it modeled as if we did not? Would there ever be exception to that? I mean, obviously, I love that you mentioned assessing risk, right? That is what it's all about, when you're collectively deciding how best to approach a program.
Yeah. And so we're still, when I talk about model informed drug development, there's still, capital drug development, capital D,
Yeah.
right? And so it's still the same, the same considerations that one would have. It's just the way that we practice drug development is a little bit different by incorporating, right, data and models and analysis. But no one should follow them blindly, right? It's good information, but it's not uncommon to go against the models, right? And maybe say, well, the model says I could start at 100 milligrams as the starting dose, but for reasons X, Y, and Z, I'm not really comfortable with that. So let's start at 50. But then maybe it gives you the comfort once you get that first cohort of data back. Then maybe you can be more aggressive on your dose escalation.
So a little more conservative up front. Maybe we're also, we're testing a certain formulation at a certain dose at a certain frequency right now, but ultimately we might be going in a different indication. Maybe we want to change how it's dosed. Maybe we want to change how it's delivered. So we might want some information about the lower doses, even though this isn't necessarily driving this study per se. Is this an example of why someone would continue to do it, even if like a model suggested you didn't have to?
Absolutely. So that's a good one, right? In terms of changing formulation or not being confident in what the human bioavailability might be, right? So that's a
Mhm.
common problem is you'll get bioavailability in rats and dogs and monkeys that may be quite different. So which one is going to match human most effectively? So that first dose in a human is really kind of a test dose, right? But I always like to think about it, if you knew that you had that information up front, you could better design the rest of the trial. So we try to, as I know Altasciences does, make these studies hyper adaptive,
Yes.
right? So once you get that initial piece of data, then you can recast all of your doses and recast all the rest of the trial to be able to optimize it, rather than setting everything up in advance and just locking it in. And then it becomes just a checkbox that, okay, I'm going to go, from dose 1 to dose 2 to dose 3, and then I'm going to switch to my MAD cohorts, and we're just going to give them, give the dose Q12 hours.
Exactly.
All of that can be adjusted as the study goes.
Exactly. Yeah, no, adaptive language in the protocol, mandatory if you're going to follow this sort of mantra. Otherwise it would just be amendment after amendment after amendment. We would not be introducing efficiency here.
That's right.
Another reason why Altasciences has moved to adaptive formulating as well, to be able to actually, put together example formulations, actually see it on live subject data and be able to manipulate it in between. This is another example of learning, right, from the information that we're gathering. So, I mean, of course, I'm a little biased here. I think it's a no-brainer, but, why isn't everybody doing this, Patrick? Why isn't everybody adopting this? Or are they actually adopting it? Is it more so, yes, they are, or more so clients are not using model-informed drug development?
So I think it's being adopted to varying degrees, right? All the big pharmas have departments that do this, right? So they have teams of people.
Yes, but they have a lot of data.
They have a lot of data, and they have teams of people, right? That and they have many compounds that they're developing, and so they can afford to put this infrastructure in place. Even though we could talk about, the silos within large pharma and how they don't communicate always across functional areas very effectively, but different conversation. But, how do smaller companies tap in, right? If the big guys have established model-informed drug development as best practices, if you don't have a huge infrastructure like Pfizer or Merck or something, how does a little biotech of 20 people tap into that kind of a process? And that's one of the things that, why Certara exists, is to be able to bring that capability, and you can get an R&D organization similar to what you would get if you were in Pfizer, with a smaller biotech company. But it becomes really hard, I think, for them, because they have to go out and manage multiple vendors,
Yes.
multiple contracts. They may have heard about modeling, but may not know how to truly integrate it into a program. So a lot of times they end up sitting in the middle, and they find a CRO to run their trial, and then they go hire someone like Certara, and then they're managing a biostats group, and they're managing all of these vendors who are not talking to each other, right? And then if they want us to model the data from the CRO, there has to be a data transfer agreement, and that data has to come in and then go out and then come back in a time frame to be able to alter an ongoing study. It's impossible. There are too many
Yeah.
inefficiencies, too many handoffs. And so our objective, and why I'm so excited to work with Altasciences, is to be able to put both organizations on the same side of the table, be able to make the data flows much more seamless and automated, and be able to take out a lot of that unnecessary churn that really makes it technically unfeasible to leverage the full capabilities of MIDD. And so it's really optimizing both the execution of the studies and the analytics and data interpretation.
I agree. I agree. Our model is absolutely eliminating the white space, eliminating the need to sit front and center and manage all of your, providers around you. And then when you add in the model informed drug development, not only are we, going from study to study as efficiently as possible, but we're actually doing the exact right study when we're at that part of the development phase anyways, because we've been helped. So, I mean, back to your point, big pharma has lots of data, lots of teams that have been looking at this. Small biotech, one asset, this is not what they have accessible. So, what would you say? Like, are there any barriers to kind of getting them to adopt this sort of model informed drug development? Are you basically like, how are you informing them of what they can take advantage of? Are you using like case studies? Are you comparing it that you have the power of like a large pharma, even though you don't have your own data set internally? You're tapping into Certara for this. Tell me a little bit about the experience, because I know both companies, we really focus a lot on, everywhere from the stealth, biotech to the mid-sized players. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we're very much the same in terms of the size of companies. We work with everybody, right? And we're also, if they have internal resources, we're also, very happy to collaborate and work with clinical pharmacologists or other people, statisticians on their team. So we do that all the time, and we like to really think about ourselves as partners with the companies we work with. So we're
Yes, absolutely.
really think of ourselves as part of the development team, right? And integrate in to do things, together and jointly. So that's super important.
So, Patrick, we definitely observe here at Alta Sciences, kind of a common theme. We have certainly clients that are looking to go faster if they're not mandated already to have this acceleration. I hear numbers as high as 30% accelerated or faster. This is pretty much on the critical path for biotech. Also, R&D spend. I mean, we know what it costs to bring a drug to life. It's absolutely an investment and a commitment. And to smaller organizations, they cannot afford to have an issue or have a misstep. So, how can this really deploy effectively here? I mean, to me, this is, the ultimate guide and help here to really get a biotech to their inflection point and, be more valuable when you get there, right? Because obviously if we add clinical data to any package, we've obviously really enhanced the value of that asset. So talk a little bit more how we can use model-informed drug development to get us there.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we do all of this modeling stuff is to be able to ask the what if questions,
What
right?
if? Yep.
And so at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to do every experiment or run every possible trial in every population. So we want to build these models so we can ask those questions. What if you changed the dose? What if you went into pediatrics? What if you went into this population? What if you studied these indications for a longer period of time? What would that generate? And so there are many applications that we have used over the years to support the process of biotechs and venture capital organizations to make decisions, including in the diligence process. So when these companies are looking at potentially acquiring or licensing an asset, we are frequently assisting in that process. And some of that includes using modeling approaches to make predictions of, what is the likely therapeutic dose of this compound? And can that be, consistent with the TPP, right? If you have a competitor that's twice a day, and the main differentiator here is this drug needs to be once a day, or with some of the weight loss compounds once a week versus moving it to once a month or once a quarter,
Right. Oral versus
all of
injection. Yeah.
that. And so it becomes extremely useful to be able to project out what's the likelihood that you could switch this to an oral dose at a pill size that or tablet size that could be manageable. So questions like that, which really drive really important decisions about the acquisition and licensing of those components. The other sort of area is in the fundraising arena. So when these
Yes, of course,
companies,
which both of our organizations encounter constantly, right? So,
absolutely, so they're out trying to raise money, say to fund a phase 2 trial, you can do a lot to supplement the existing data that maybe was collected in phase 1.
right, your clinical insights can actually be part of this data package if you really
Absolutely.
design this study correctly. Yeah.
So we can do comparative analyses. We have clinical trial databases in about 50 or 60 indications where we can actually benchmark the performance of this molecule, simulate the phase 2 trial, and compare it head to head, how using some statistical approaches to say, okay, if there was a head-to-head trial in the same population, same study design, this is how this compound would perform against, say, the main competitor or the incumbent in that space. And so there are numerous examples where people have used this successfully to build their case to raise more money to fund development programs, or has led to acquisitions outright as an important part of putting the data that exists in context and building upon it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm definitely hearing commercial strategy ultimately is very, very important. We obviously want to make sure that we've got, payers at the end of the day, right, that are going to support our drug development. And we want to put forth the best package, obviously, to our investors, right? So, do you think there's ever an instance where MIDD is not a good idea, not something you should apply to the study?
No, it's always
You're
a
not
good
biased or
idea.
anything.
It's always a good idea, but
Yeah, of course.
how you do it and what questions you ask, right, may be different. There are some areas where it's not going to necessarily add a lot of value at a specific time in development, and we see that from time to time. You need a really, what we try to do is put an entire development strategy together that includes a data strategy. So what data are you going to need for this asset? We have a real world evidence team that you can go out and curate relevant data from, medical records and those kinds of places, and how we're going to use modeling to support the program. And once you have that strategy in place, every program's different. There are certain times where, let's not bother with this. Let's go collect the data, because it's not going to necessarily change decisions we're going to do right now.
Right. Right.
But let's ensure we have the right data to be able to then execute on our overall strategy and build the model that may come a little bit later.
Exactly. Well, modeled or not, right? We want to always be sure we're collecting the right information from the protocol standpoint. The truth is we are looking at data, right? No matter what, we are looking at data in real time, whether that's for, safety, whether that's to ensure our PK is behaving the way we think it's going to behave, we want to make sure. So even if it's not per se a formal model being used, in a way we are modeling like in real time everything that's going on with these studies. So Patrick, is it ever going to be a replacement? Are we going to eliminate needing animals? Are we going to eliminate needing patients be part of this? What do you think?
Well, if we were sitting here 2 years ago and I mentioned that we were going to get rid of animal testing, you would have called me crazy, right? World has really changed in that
Yes.
time, right? So now we're having serious conversations about how do we do that?
Yeah.
And the objective is, it's probably going to be a while before we get rid of animal studies for sure.
Yeah.
But the overall objective is not just getting rid of animals for animals' sake, although we would all agree, right? That's a good thing. But actually, can we do things that improve the predictability that's actually better, right? We have a lot of opportunities to add, these microphysiological systems, organ on a chip, combine that with modeling, combine that with animal data, and we can do a lot better. I like the quote that someone had said that, we know 90% of drugs that get into humans fail, but every single one of them, right, was shown to be safe and efficacious in animals. So it's got to tell you there's got to be a better way, right?
Right. Got to be a better way.
Got to be a better way. And so I think there will be a continuous, as these use cases get better, as our ability to analyze data gets better. At the moment, we're all absolutely swimming in data. There's data from everywhere. There's omics. There's wearables. There's all of this stuff from all over the place.
Sure.
And we are not anywhere near being able to harness all of that information,
right, and really apply it
and make sense of it. So I don't think we're, wouldn't say never, but I don't think in the next little while we're likely to get rid of clinical trials altogether. But I do believe that drug development becomes more in silico and less reliance on trials, right? There are many examples of, for example, using synthetic control arms and getting rid of placebo groups, right? I think with the way the world is changing, with availability of data, not only in drug development, as I mentioned before, but in healthcare in general, that the whole system can look very, very different than it does today.
And doing one very succinct, let's say like phase 3 pivotal trial where we're really looking at this.
Yeah, which the FDA has recently been talking about as well, just one phase 3 trial. So there's some recent guidance and publications of trying to move to one trial, which different conversation. Yeah.
As this evolves and we do use less animals, maybe we someday eliminate that. Same with, human participants. Maybe we also use less, or if we could ever get to the point of not needing them at all. What do you think that does with an actual patient that's going to be a recipient of the medication? Do you think there's hesitation in them wanting to either participate in a trial that kind of had been led through that direction? Or do you think there'd be any hesitation in taking that medication? Knowing that it didn't go through, thousands and thousands of patients before them, what is your thoughts on that?
It's a fascinating question, right? I think the general public doesn't have any idea, right, of the process.
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you. COVID helped. COVID helped to educate the world, but
Yeah, they rely, oh, if this has been approved by the FDA,
exactly.
and that's good enough for me. So whatever it takes to get through that process is probably going to be okay for most people, maybe not all. I think that the goal here is to do a better job of predicting outcome, of understanding risk benefit. And so, hopefully where we're headed is we're able to do that, right, just as well, if not better. And I would argue we'll be able to do it better with smaller numbers of patients. The one place where we get stuck is these, rare, unpredictable
Of
safety
course.
events. No model's going to predict that.
No.
And you're not going to find that until,
Our DNA and our makeup's quirky, right? Like, you never know for sure.
yeah, until you've exposed thousands of patients to a drug. The likelihood of even finding that in trials is fairly remote. It's not until it gets out into the market. And so I think all of this will transition to continuing to improve market surveillance, pharmacovigilance, and being able to really monitor things once they are approved and on the market. And, as we like to say, FDA approval is, in a lot of ways, the game is just getting started at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's definitely still challenges in drug development. What I'm really excited about with Certara Altasciences coming together is obviously having the ability to do the most optimized, accelerated program that we can do. In my mind, there's definitely areas where you can accelerate very effectively when you're in preclinical, for instance, IND enabling studies, really making sure you're entering first in human as early as possible, of course, and making a very adaptive, complex protocol so you can collect the data that you need. I mean, in my mind, these are the spaces in which you're able to accelerate, but the challenges still exist when we get to patient recruitment, things like that. So to me, I feel like the benefit to our clients is that, we are accelerating and saving time where we can, so that it also opens up a little more flexibility for the areas that we don't have as much control on, which is human beings and patients and accessibility to some of these like rare and orphan diseases, right? Pediatric indications. We're very fortunate for every patient that is willing to be part of the trials that we do. So what do you agree with me? Do you continue to see that there are still challenges with drug development?
Absolutely. And there are many, right? Like I say, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah,
Um,
everybody would have a molecule.
yeah, exactly. Right. Everybody's
Okay.
side hustle would be developing a drug. It's exceedingly hard. And you have issues from on the patient recruitment side, from so many molecules in development that you can't recruit enough patients, right? So there's actually when you think about the use of modeling there, many times rare diseases, other oncology applications that you just can't recruit, right?
Right, exactly.
Competing studies and so on. So there's no shortage of problems to solve and problems to work on. I think
Right,
that's for sure.
exactly.
But I think there's a lot of exciting things going on as well, with being able to sample remotely, right? Being able to
Yes.
make trials easier and reduce the friction of people participating, home visits, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, decentralized trials really open
Yeah.
that up. Yeah. Awesome, awesome. Okay. So, Patrick, with everything we talked about today with model-informed drug development, are you eliminating work for CROs like ourselves at Alta Sciences, or we just really being smarter about what we're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the objective of Certara is to do smarter, smaller trials. And, when we can avoid it, let's not do any trials at all. So I think that the entire business model is changing, and we all need to adapt and evolve with those changes. But I think if the cost of drug development goes down, you'll have actually more money flowing, right? Because the return on investment will be greater.
That's exactly right.
And so I think it ultimately helps everybody. So maybe the number of patients in a study, the number of cohorts may go down. Hopefully the number of studies actually goes up as a result.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're also moving away from this paradigm of being just a contract research organization, especially when you look at, Certara Altasciences combined effort. I mean, we're a drug development platform that you can come and take full advantage of to optimize your program. And I agree with you. I think perhaps each program might, have less studies within them, but allowing you to then potentially look at more assets than you normally would. And, obviously the ability to fit in, more studies in a year collectively, I think the efficiency will certainly outweigh anything that might get eliminated. So I love it. All right. Well, Patrick, it would not be off label if I did not ask you a surprise question. So I'm going to ask you this question now. Certara has been at the forefront of model-informed drug development. If you could eliminate one traditional step in development because modeling makes it redundant, what would it be, and what's still holding the industry back from letting it go? Should have given you some surprise time to think about the surprise
Yeah,
question.
we'll come back
right?
and answer that tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I think if I was to, I'm not sure it would be eliminate, but I guess it would be more of blurring the lines between this concept of achieving the approval of a drug and the launch and access of that drug, right? So we used to say that the worst thing that could happen in drug development is you run a phase 3 trial and it fails and you don't get approval. It's not the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen,
No, but it's pretty devastating for
it's
a
pretty
company.
devastating, but worse than that is you run a phase 3 trial, it's successful, but then you have a commercial failure, right? So then you've put the commercial team up, you've done a global launch, and you've sunk more costs in that you'll never get back. So that's even worse. And so I think people are starting to recognize that you need to think more about commercial. You need to think about market access earlier in the process. And we need to be blurring the lines between development and marketing, if you will.
I agree.
And so, to that end, we have done a lot of interesting work around evidence generation, and we create these sophisticated models that the FDA approves that show up in drug labels and everything. And then, unfortunately, what has tended to happen is the drug gets approved, the models get put away, and the development team essentially goes away, and the asset becomes driven by medical affairs, and they're not aware that this model exists. So there's a ton more value that we can create by continuing to generate phase 4 evidence within that setting that can add a lot of value, help drive market access and adoption. So I think it's a missed opportunity now. Some companies are starting to recognize it. Some are bringing commercial and medical affairs in earlier to start working on this problem. But I would say, for me, that's probably the number one dream at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more that we cannot talk to you too early. It is absolutely impossible to speak to you too early. Everything from getting your drug product ready to go, because there is no studies if we have no drug product, to, really devising a strategy that fits both how we adeptly go through the drug development, but also fitting your inflection point or your commercialization strategy. I couldn't agree with you more. So this is great. Okay, bold prediction time, Patrick. Bold prediction about the future. Get your crystal ball out if it's not on your desk already. What do you think the next few years may hold for Certara and the drug development industry at large?
So I think that we're on the verge of a number of breakthroughs that's going to disrupt the model significantly. These things are converging from the use of AI and machine learning, the openness to, apparent openness of regulators to making the process more efficient, of reducing animals, as we talked about, using more microphysiological systems and using more analytics in the process. So I think that we're going to get the timelines to get a drug to market down substantially, more so than we ever have.
Yeah, it should be great.
And that essentially the business model is going to be flipped on its head. So it's going to be much easier for smaller companies, supported by AI, to develop drugs. And so I think we're going to see a lot more people doing it. I don't think the day of a micro biotech is far away, where you literally could have one guy, right, with a bunch of AI agents from every development team sitting around, being able to partner with folks like Altasciences, like Certara, to be able to actually do this very efficiently and very, very quickly.
Nice. Okay, so Patrick, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you for being a guest on Off Label. It was great to speak to you. I'm really excited about what we're doing already together, really excited about the organization's partnership now between Certara and Altasciences, and I'm really excited about what that means for our clients and for the success of the drug development industry.
Thanks, Lisa. Really appreciate the opportunity. Love the conversation. And I also am absolutely thrilled to be working even more intentionally together with Altasciences going forward.
Even more. Great. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Till next time.